Thank you members of the Barbershop Course. That was a great way to start off today. Good morning, I'm Clay Mountcastle. I'm the director here at the Virginia War Memorial, and welcome to our 2023 Patriot Day observance here at the memorial. Normally, I have prepared remarks, a bit of a shell script to go off when we do our ceremonies. Today I thought I'd forego that, if that's okay with you. I wanted to do a little more speak from the heart rather than read from prepared lines. I think today is fitting for that. Every 9/11, I think, for each of us holds a special significance. It's not uniform across the board. And one reason for that is the question of why. Why is it important to every day mark the significance of 9/11? You know, it has been 22 years now. We're in that time cycle now where we're like, oh, gee, can you believe 22 years? Wow. It's hard to believe that it's been that long. You know, and we always remark about how many of us in the audience aren't old enough to remember 9/11. I would bet that a lot of our young men and women in uniform here today probably weren't not even born on 9/11. So those always serve as a reminder of how much time has passed. But the question always presents itself, why? Why is it important to mark this? And what I've learned over the years of trying to answer that question is that you can only truly answer it for yourself, because everybody will have a different reason as to why it's important to remember 9/11. For me, it boils down to a couple of reasons. One, no singular event in my lifetime has meant more to me as an American than witnessing what happened to our country on 9/11. So that day was probably the most important day in my lifetime as far as my understanding of what it means to be an American, my understanding of this country and what's important and what's not, what's good about it. That's why it's important to me. It's also important to me because I have young children who only have my thoughts, my memories, and those of their teachers and people old enough to remember to learn from. And I do know that if we do not continually make the effort to explain to our children, younger generation, of what happened, why it was significant, that they will not be able to carry that understanding on further. In the other shrine of memory, every year on December 7th, we mark Pearl Harbor Day. That is an important day. Still, 82 years removed, it's still important. I hope 82 years from now, we'll still be having our 9/11 Patriot Day observance. It's that important to do. So when you ask yourself, when you explain to others, why is it important to take some time and mark 9/11, you know, you have to answer it for yourself. And I hope that you have a lot of reasons to explain to those people why it is. So with that, we have a great ceremony lined up today. I want to thank you all for being here. As always, it's a Monday, start of a work week. There's a lot of different things you could be doing today. I know there's a lot of other things happening today. I noticed looking on the calendar, there are a lot of golf tournaments happening around town today. To me, that seems a little odd. I still, it doesn't sit well with me necessarily to play around a golf on the morning of 9/11. Because when I think of the morning of September 11th, I'm still paused on that. And I know some people out there might think or say, hey, Clay, you know what? You want me to stop my life for everything? And my answer to that is yes, actually. Every September 11th, especially in the morning, I would ask that you stop your life for a few minutes to reflect, to think about those that lost their lives, and think about the tremendous impact that morning had on this country. So I appreciate you stopping your lives for a few minutes to be with us this morning. And with that, we will start our program with our national anthem, followed by Pledge of Allegiance. So I'll please ask you to rise for the Virginia Barbershop Chorus. We'll perform our national anthem. Please remain standing while the 345th Training Squadron of the United States Air Force leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance. To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. And again, in terms of welcome, I would just like to welcome everybody being here today. I would especially like to welcome the members of our law enforcement that are here with us today, members of our military that are joining us. Obviously, 9/11 and Patriot Day has a big meaning for that community and how those communities are connected to all of us. So I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank members of the Freedom Flag Foundation for being here today, those that made the Freedom Flag possible. I encourage you, if you are not familiar with the Freedom Flag, or if you are, stop by and talk to the folks from the Freedom Flag Foundation. They have a table set up over on the side of the shrine, and it's a very interesting story. It's an amazing, simple, I think it's an even better story behind the Freedom Flag and what those very patriotic, great Americans are doing to try and carry the story of 9/11 throughout the year, throughout the country. It's a wonderful endeavor, and I applaud them for that. I want to thank Mackenzie from Representative Spanberger's office being here. She's a great friend. And so, again, thank you all for being here. 9/11, which a lot of people still don't understand when you say Patriot Day. What is Patriot Day? You know, a number of years ago, officially deemed Patriot Day, but 9/11, it's something that I try to apply themes to often. And there are a lot of themes you could put to that tragic event. A few years ago, I tried to talk about how it was also a wonderful event, and that raised a few eyebrows when I mentioned that. But I tried to focus not so much on the events of that morning, but I tried to focus on the events of the days and the weeks and the months following, and what it felt like to be an American in those days and weeks. I myself have never known a better time to be an American than the days and weeks and months following 9/11. I've never felt a greater sense of community as I did then. I was an active duty member of the Army at the time. And even having been a member of the military, I still did not yet know that true feeling of community and being an American as I saw in the community around me in those days after 9/11. This year, tying in with the idea of it being a wonderful event for our country in many ways, it is very much an inspiring event. It was a catastrophe, it's a terrible tragedy. Again, maybe the worst tragedy that my generation has ever personally witnessed. But there are so many different ways that I witnessed inspiration coming out of the events of 9/11. A good example of that is listed behind you all, enshrined on the glass behind you, of the name of 175 Virginians that died. Most of them, almost all of them, in the global war on terrorism. There's a very good chance that none of those names would be here were it not for 9/11. And the vast majority of those Virginians listed there were inspired by what happened on 9/11 to join up and serve their country. And they felt so strongly about it that they joined an army or a military at war, going to war, knowing the cost that might be associated. And unfortunately, those listed behind you paid that ultimate price for all of us. And so when I walk out here every day, I feel very fortunate to be here. I feel very fortunate to see those names because I get a lot of inspiration from that. The thought that you have many names on here that hadn't even seen their 20th birthday yet. But they witnessed 9/11, they were in high school, some of them younger than that, and waited eagerly to be old enough to join the military so they could go serve their country. Because what they all felt, and what I feel, is that the country was handed a tremendous challenge on 9/11. A challenge that so many Americans felt needed to be answered in a number of different ways. And if that meant serving in the military, they served. If that meant volunteering in your community, it meant volunteering. If that meant helping out a neighbor, neighbors helped out. It was an inspiring moment. And another thing I'm very thankful for is that I believe that 9/11 kind of woke us all up to the significance of our first responders and our law enforcement. They became a part of our daily lives like they never had been before, in the very best of ways. Now, I know the cynics amongst us will just kind of roll our eyes and say, oh yeah, it takes a lot longer to get to the airport now, since 9/11. But what I see is a portion of our community that has dedicated their lives to keeping their fellow Americans safe on a daily basis, putting themselves at risk on a daily basis to keep people that they don't even know safe. To me, that's inspiring. And I'm personally very thankful that 9/11 woke me up to our first responders, our law enforcement, what they have to do, what they do every day. And as I went on in my military career and I deployed to other parts of the world as part of the global war on terrorism, I would come back and it dawned on me that our law enforcement folks protecting our communities, protecting our homeland, they deploy every day. They step out the door into what could be defined in some places as a combat environment, depending on your community, a dangerous environment, and there's no guarantee that they will walk back in the door that night. So when we in the military would deploy, we'd have that thought in the back of our head, well, I don't know if I'm going to be returning from this deployment. So many in our law enforcement have that thought go through their head every single day when they go to work. And to me, that's sobering, but it's also very inspiring. And I'm very proud to have learned about our law enforcement and our first responders. I'm very proud of the job that they do to keep us safe. And it's a real honor when we can have them here to join us. So, I was very pleased, I was very honored when I reached out to Sheriff Karl Leonard from Chesterfield County and asked if he would provide keynote remarks today. Because you see, Sheriff Leonard has a very unique, I think, qualification to speak today. Sheriff Leonard also has 30 years serving with the Coast Guard. So he knows what it's like to serve in uniform of many different types. And to serve at home, serve the community in Chesterfield County, but also serve the nation as a whole. As part of his service with the Coast Guard, Sheriff Leonard deployed to Ground Zero and helped in that recovery effort. And to me, that is a fascinating time that I always want to hear more about. Because we all were glued to our TVs for the first few days, and then we did try and get on with our lives. But you know what? Hundreds, thousands of Americans converged on Manhattan to not just get on with their lives, but to try and pick up the pieces literally from that terrible, tragic event. And I think they probably learned so much that would be of value to the rest of us. So I'm very thankful that Sheriff Leonard is here today. And of course, as I just mentioned, the significance of law enforcement and our first responders. And he knows all about that. And so it is with great pleasure and real privilege that I introduce Chesterfield County Sheriff Karl Leonard. Sheriff. Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Director Mountcastle, thank you so much for inviting me to do this. It's a very humbling experience on this day of all days to be able to stand up here and provide my remarks. I do want to welcome everybody here. There's a lot of friends here, members of my DAV, my American Legion, my VFW are here, and I appreciate it. And to all the citizens of this wonderful world we're in, thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't start ad-libbing, which is always dangerous, by introducing my good friend Clarence Singleton, who is, his friendship to me has been important over the years. We share a couple bonds. Clarence is a former Marine, served in Vietnam, was wounded in Vietnam, and that wasn't enough for him. He wanted to serve some more, so he joined the New York City Fire Department, where he was on 9/11, where he helped pull people out of the wreckage, the building, for days on end. And when I get to my comments, he and I share another bond I'll talk about briefly, but sir, you lived the experience as well, and I thank you for all your service. So again, thank you for asking me to be part of this special event. Like everyone else, the events of 9/11 were especially emotional for me and changed my life. On September 10th of 2001, I was a captain with the Chesterfield Police Department in charge of patrol operations in the south end of the county. I was also a Coast Guard Reserve officer with the rank of Lieutenant Commander, 04, assigned to Port Security Unit 305 out of Fort Eustis, Virginia Army Base. I served as the unit's operations officer. Port security units are probably the best kept secret in the Coast Guard, are trained to provide anti-terrorism force protection and coastal defense for missions inside and outside the United States. Our tasking is to be operational within 96 hours anywhere in the world. That means in 96 hours, we're in our boats on patrol, securing an area. There are only 8 of these units in the United States. All 8 are 100% reserve units, not active duty. They're located at all 4 corners of the United States, from Cape Cod, Massachusetts to Clearwater, Florida, from Long Beach, California to Everett, Washington, as well as in Kiln, Mississippi, Port Clinton, Ohio, San Francisco, and Fort Eustis. Back to being a police officer. Every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., our police chief held a command staff meeting for all captains and above in our organization. My normal Tuesdays began early, around 5:30 a.m., as I needed to get dressed into my station house so I could get updated on the matters before I went to the staff meeting, which was at police headquarters. Tuesday, September 11, 2001 was no different. And about the same time I was getting out the door at 5:45 a.m., Mohammed Atta and Abdul Aziz Omari passed through security at the Portland International Airport in Maine, where they boarded a commuter flight to Boston, where they then connected on American Airlines Flight 11, which departed at 7:59 a.m. for Los Angeles. It was now a little after 9 a.m., and I was sitting in the command staff meeting with the police chief. Then, eerily similar to the video we all saw where the aide came in to President Bush, who was addressing and reading a book at a school in Florida, whispered in their ear there was an attack, somebody interrupted our meeting and advised the police chief that a plane had crashed into one of the Twin Towers in New York City. Then another interruption, as the police chief was notified a second plane had crashed into the second Twin Tower at 9:03 a.m., 17 minutes after the first. It was obvious now that this was no accident. The United States was under a deliberate attack. At that moment, our world, as we knew it, changed forever. At the local level, we had to react rapidly. If terrorists would be as unconventional as to fly planes into buildings, what other threats would we possibly see in our county? Attacks on military installations, banks, shopping centers, Interstate 95? We scrambled the best we could to predict the unpredictable and to be prepared to address the unknown. That Tuesday, we worked late into the night. Before I go on, I want to introduce a good friend of mine, Rick Reese. Raise your hand, Rick. Rick is a retired senior chief from the Coast Guard, served in the police department for almost 30 years. He and I are best friends, and we went to drill together every month. So on Wednesday morning, the day after the attack, the day started very early for me. I had to be at the Defense Supply Center in Richmond, which is DLA, which is located in Chesterfield County, at 5 a.m. for a meeting with their staff to talk about security precautions for their facility. Before I even arrived, I received a phone call from my best friend, Rick. When I answered, he asked me, was I picking him up or was he picking me up? I was confused, and I said, what are you talking about? He said, we were mobilized and we had a report to Fort Eustis in a few hours. I told him not to joke, don't mess with me. It's been very trying. But he said, it's not a joke, we've been mobilized. I said, listen, Rick, I'm the operations officer. I'm the third in command. If we were mobilizing, I would know. I said, but I'm going to make a quick call. So I called my unit. Being a Wednesday morning and being so early, nobody should be there. We're only there on drill weekends. Nobody should answer the phone on a Wednesday morning. As soon as I called the number, my executive officer answered the phone. Right away, I knew I'd been missed. So when my XO answered the phone, I asked him, did you forget to call somebody? It immediately dawned on him that he set this entire phone tree in motion for 150 members. He forgot to call one person, the person directly underneath him. I then had less than an hour to let my police department know I was leaving for an undetermined amount of time, which would certainly leave them in a lurch. I had to pack my gear for a deployment. We had no clue how long it would last. I had to say goodbye to my wife and kids, who were by now in school. It all happened so quick and in such a whirlwind. But within an hour, Rick and I were headed down Interstate 64 for the 90-minute trip to Fort Eustis. As much as a whirlwind that was, the next 24 hours were even more chaotic, but it was organized chaos. We soon found our large convoy approaching New York City very late at night. From the outskirts of town, darkness reigned everywhere, except for the eerie and gut-wrenching glow of Ground Zero, a sight I will never forget. Like the last burning ember of a campfire in a dark night, the glow from Ground Zero pierced the darkness all around us. All Americans were mad, furious, angry, but for me, this was personal. My father was born and raised in New York City. I grew up there as a little kid. This hurt. New York was on a complete lockdown, as you can imagine. Nothing was moving. We had to pass through a series of police checkpoints to where we finally ended up at Fort Wadsworth on Staten Island, where we quickly set up a tent city, which would be our home base for the next 2 months. From our tent city, you could easily see the burning glow and smoke from Ground Zero just across the Hudson River, and depending on the wind direction, you could smell it. The largest city in the world, with nearly 1,000 hotels, the most hotel rooms in any one place, was not safe for us to stay in due to uncertainty of the potential threat that we were all operating under. So we were relegated to living on cots in GP medium tents. But looking back, it really didn't matter, as the days were nonstop. You only hit the rack, your cot, when you had a few minutes to catch a cat nap. This went on for weeks. There were no breaks, no weekends, no letting your guard down. As quick as Tent City went up, we also set up security operations. Our gunboats were assigned to the waterfront area of Ground Zero, to the piers where the operational control center was, to the pier where the family staging areas were, as well as overall coordination for all the events. Most people were not aware, but the Coast Guard had a major role in securing New York City. Other military branches had limited involvement because of the legal restraints spelled out in the Posse Comitatus Act. That bars federal troops from participating in civil law enforcement duties inside the United States. The Coast Guard was part of the Department of Transportation, not Department of Defense, so we handled most of the operations at Ground Zero. Our boats and boat crews patrolled 24/7. Certainly Ground Zero was a concern, but so were the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, major bridges connecting all the boroughs, the Intrepid, the U.S. hospital ship Comfort, and many other high-value assets. From the minute we arrived on site, we all knew this was not your typical war-fighting environment. The enemy was not wearing uniforms. And while our boat crews are very well trained and the best of the best, we never thought that one day they would be in a position they may have to shoot down a U.S. plane with Americans on board. How screwed up is that? Luckily, that scenario never presented itself. One of the critical missions we did every day was to escort the family members of those who were missing to Ground Zero. Because of the extent of the debris field and the operational footprint for recovery, there was no vehicle traffic coming in and out of there. So these family members had to be transported by ferry to Ground Zero every day. You could only fit about 100 of them. Thousands were waiting staged. Every 2 hours, we would change them out with another group of 100 people missing their loved ones. And this is probably where the most humbling moment in my life occurred. It was during one of these movements when we were offloading family members at Ground Zero when a lady came up to me to thank me for what I was doing and thank me for my sacrifice for being there. I thought to myself, this lady is missing a husband, son, father, daughter, somebody, with no idea where they are, how they are, or even if they are. and she wants to thank me for my sacrifice. I was numb. The operations at Ground Zero were fever pitch. Everyone knew that every minute counted. If you ever have been to New York City, you know how loud of a place it is. One of my most vivid memories of this operation is when the remains were found. And I'm sure, Clarence, you can remember. Unfortunately, in most cases, it was not a complete body. But even if it was just a finger, everything stopped. All work came to a halt. Silence would come over the entire borough of Manhattan. And it was eerily quiet. The remains were always given tremendous honors as they were taken from Ground Zero to the waiting ambulance or hearse, where they would go into slow procession to where the temporary morgue was set up. Every vehicle along the route came to a stop. Every person would step out of their car, along with those on foot, and salute as it went by. And as soon as it went out of sight, the frantic search efforts would resume. Tragically, less than 300 bodies were recovered. Over 1,100 were never found. The fire burned so hot that metal was combusting. The second Sunday after the attack, September 23rd, they held a memorial service at Yankee Stadium. To say this was surreal is an understatement. Our boats were assigned to Hudson River, right at the side of Yankee Stadium. We were patrolling this with gunboats. I used to go to Yankee games with my dad when I was a kid. Now I'm patrolling the waterfront outside of Yankee Stadium with armed boats with high-powered weapons locked and loaded. This was not a foreign country. It was New York City. And finding ourselves there in that position was very hard to grasp. This is not what the U.S. military was trained for, a war front in our own country. That service was attended by the president, most of his cabinet, high-ranking political figures, VIPs, celebrities, family members of those still missing, and many others. It would be a security nightmare even if there wasn't a recent terrorist attack. But the overwhelming consensus was this needed to happen so the nation could start to heal. So a podium was set up on second base where Bette Midler sang Wind Beneath My Wings, Placido Domingo sang Ave Maria, and New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliano told some 1,500 in attendance, on September 11th, New York City suffered the darkest day in its history. It's now up to us to make it our finest hour. Mingled with the tears of those many in attendance, the crowd erupted when Admiral Robert Nutter, commander of the U.S. Navy's Atlantic Fleet, said of the terrorists, "You picked on the wrong city, you picked on the wrong country." The end of the memorial really set in process the beginning of return to normalcy for New York City. Broadway opened up for resumption of plays. New York Stock Exchange opened for business. 2 days prior to that, on September 21st, the first Mets game was played in New York. That night, Mike Piazza's dramatic eighth-inning home run propelled the Mets to a 3-2 victory over Atlanta at Shea Stadium. Then on November 3rd of 2001, the 32nd running of the annual New York City Marathon went on as scheduled. The men's elite race was won by Ethiopia's Tesfar Jafar, while the women's race was won by Kenya's Margaret Okoye. Both of their winning times were records. This event, perhaps more than any other, signified a return to normalcy. Not only because of the 23,648 runners that day, or the tens of thousands that lined up to watch it, or the millions who turned up to view it on TV, but because to make this race happen, we had to pack up our operations and return to Virginia. The land we were sitting on with our tent city was the staging point, the first corral of the marathon. After 2 months of nonstop operations, our mission was over. But for me, it was anything but over. Because of the attacks of 9/11, I would be redeployed in support of our Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2002, 2003, 2005, and 2008. 2,974 people who were at the Trade Center on the ground perished as a result of the attacks and subsequent collapse of the towers. But that does not tell the entire story. 2 decades after foreign terrorists attacked Americans on U.S. soil, the impact of September 11, 2001 is still being felt today. Hundreds of thousands of people remain at risk due to the trauma and exposure of toxic air flowing following each attack. Carcinogens from building materials, gases, jet fuels, lace the air around each crash site, with the most severe toxicity among the ruins of World Trade Center towers in New York City. An estimated 410,000 first responders, cleanup crews, and survivors spent days and weeks breathing in air heavy with toxins from 400 tons of crushed concrete, glass, and asbestos at Ground Zero. Exposure to contaminated air and toxic chemicals created a growing list of health concerns for many of the men and women who were there, with some illnesses such as mesothelioma taking up to 20 years to develop. One fallout from this event is the creation of the World Trade Center Health Program Registry, which was created to track and monitor all those who were exposed. Clarence Singleton and myself are members of this registry, unfortunately. They monitor my health very closely. You see, after responding to Ground Zero, in the years passing, I was diagnosed with cancer. And I'm fortunate to say aggressive surgery took care of it. But while, for the most part, I've been healthy following my time at Ground Zero, it's not a reflection of everybody's fate. To date, more people have now died from this toxic exposure than the 9/11 attacks. And this bears repeating. To date, more people have died from this toxic exposure than the 9/11 attacks themselves. Although 2,974 people lost their lives that day, 4,343 survivors and first responders have died in the years since, according to the World Trade Center Health Registry. Clarence Singleton talked earlier today. The New York Fire Department lost 43 firefighters this year as a result of Ground Zero exposure. These are largely unknown and seldom mentioned individuals, but they continue to die at a high rate and should be at the forefront of all of our prayers, as well as those who we lost that tragic day in history. For me, I would venture to say that everyone else who was there with me might also hold this thought. I would not trade it for anything. Being able to be at Ground Zero the day after the attack and helping so many in need is by far one of the most rewarding and humbling experiences in my life. I am grateful for the opportunity to be there, grateful for the opportunity to serve our citizens, and grateful for the opportunity to serve this great nation. And the national anthem, which we sang earlier today, applied more that day, the day after the attacks, than perhaps when it was first inspired on September 14th of 1814, when U.S. soldiers at Baltimore's Fort McHenry raised a huge American flag to celebrate a crucial victory over British forces during the War of 1812. The day after the attack, members of the New York Fire Department raised a large American flag at Ground Zero. And I take you to those words. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Semper Paratus, and thank you very much.
Please be seated. And for those in uniform, I can overrule your commander for a second. Stand at ease. Stand at ease. It's okay. All right. You won't get yelled at. Not by me. All right. But today is Patriot Day. And obviously, an important part about Patriot Day is patriotism. I think that's a wonderful thing that comes along every September 11th for me. Is to just a day where you can unapologetically be proud to be an American. For me, that's most days of the year anyway. But September 11th, if there's one day out of the year that for me stands out to be proud to be an American, it's certainly 9/11 and everything we've gone through together as a nation. So we've always tried to incorporate music, particularly patriotic music, as part of our ceremony here today. And with another selection for us, we have the Virginia Barbershop Chorus singing American Medley. So take it away.
Let
Wonderful. Thank you very much. At this time, what we do every year, like many memorials, I know in New York City, Washington, D.C., and others, we ring a memorial bell to remember those that died in the attacks of 9/11. And what you'll notice this morning is we will ring the bell 3 times and let each tone of the bell remind you of the sacrifice of those whose lives were taken from them on 9/11. We first ring the bell to remember those killed in the attacks on New York City. We next ring the bell to remember those in the attack on the Pentagon. We next remember those killed in the plane crash in Pennsylvania. Thank you. Now, if you all could please stand for me, we are going to have a memorial wreath placement by the sheriff and myself, as well as the Freedom Flag Foundation. Will place their memorial wreath up here at the top, and then we'll close with a moment of silence. Please join me in a moment of silence remembering all those killed in the attacks of September 11th. Thank you. Please be seated. Well, now, as we close today's ceremony, it's time for thanks. Again, I want to thank Sheriff Leonard, sir, for your inspiring story and your service to this country and to Chesterfield County. As a resident of Chesterfield County, thank you very much for your service. I want to thank those members in uniform, our military that's here today. All of them volunteers, remind you, all of them volunteers, perhaps some of them more than others. But we appreciate the duty that you've undertaken to serve your nation. We thank you for being here. I want to thank the members of our first responder community, members of law enforcement, same volunteers. I want to thank you for the duties that you and the responsibilities that you are undertaking to keep us safe. So if you all could join me in a round of applause for our military and our first responders. Again, I want to thank all of you for taking some time out, for stopping your lives for a few minutes to reflect and remember with us today. And I hope you'll be back next year and the year after that and the year after that, because we will always do this remembrance here at the memorial. Thank you for that. A couple points of note before you leave today. In our movie theater downstairs, all day long we will be showing our A New Century, A New War documentary that we filmed a few years ago that features the story of Virginia veterans telling their personal 9/11 stories and how that event inspired their service to go on and serve in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a wonderful documentary. We'll be showing that throughout the day if you are so inclined. Please stay, view the War Memorial. This is your War Memorial. This is for every single Virginian, everybody who wants to understand the cost of freedom, and those that have paid the ultimate sacrifice for all of our freedoms. This is your War Memorial. Please stay and reflect as you so choose. And please, one last time, stop by the Freedom Flag Foundation's information table there and learn about their mission and their journey to promote the remembrance of 9/11 throughout the year and all throughout the country. So again, thank you very much. Please, as you go forth today, think about your answer to that question, why? Why is it important every single year to honor those killed in 9/11 and to remember? Think about your answer, why, and be able to explain that to whomever. Thank you all very much for coming today. This concludes our ceremony. Be safe. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.